Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Twig Talk. Today we have Jazy. Jazy, why don't you introduce yourself and your talk?
Hi, I'm Jazy, she, her pronouns. I'll go into it a little bit more when I start to talk, but today we are going to talk about combat in Carved from Brindlewood games. This seems to be an area where people are a little bit confused, like what to do, when to use it, or like if it even has a place at all, and like what that place should be. And I really like playing stabby people. I like combat. I think action and like combat can be very interesting. So I was like, sure, I'll give my opinions. Hot take after hot take. Um, so I'll share a presentation that I made. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat as well if there's any questions. And after, when it's done, there will be, of course, an opportunity for that as well. So let me see if I can share this with all of you. There we go. All right. So, Violent Truths Combat in Carved from Brindlewood. What place does combat have in storytelling? So, today's topic, as I said, I'm going to introduce myself a bit more. We are going to focus mostly on Carved from Brindlewood. Trophy Dark has a really excellent talk on its combat role on the Darkened Threshold by Jason Cordova and Alice Rubitsky. So I don't feel like there's a lot more that I could add to that they haven't already said. It's also just more like um, mechanically delineated, like it very clearly has a role for it. So I feel like it's a bit easier for people to like feel, at least mechanically, like when and how to use it. I think the next talk that I have, like combat as a storytelling device, why and what makes a good fight scene, that's probably also going to be helpful for Trophy Dark or any game that you play that is more narrative driven and also can have combat. Um, After that, as I mentioned, Brindlewood Bay or Carved from Brindlewood games don't typically have a combat move. Maybe in the future games come out that do have it, but now it's not really a move like by itself. So I'm going to sort of go over the mechanics that we do have and how they can help you to bring combat to your table in like an interesting way. And then as I mentioned at the end, we will have time for some questions and who knows, maybe I have answers. Maybe I don't. We'll have to figure it out. We play to find out. So who am I? As I said, I'm Jazy. I'm a community member and a Stabby Femme enthusiast. My claim to fame in that regard is definitely playing Ashley Oakes in Signals from the Other Side, if you've seen that actual play. I've also played Eligio in Crown of Salt, who is also a very stabby forward person. Some of my writings have gotten published in the Gauntlet. I've wrote an Odyssey tape, and my latest that I've been very proud of is that I was a contest winner for the double feature together with Kevin. So that's been very excited. And as I mentioned, I just like action. I just think it's neat. I think combat can be very interesting in a storytelling way, not just in a haha, it's neat because somebody got stabbed and now there's blood and gore. But I think it actually can say a lot about characters and their story and their arcs. So, speaking of, combat as a storytelling device. What makes a good fight scene and why do we want to use them at all? So, why combat? What can violence actually tell us? So, the first point is that combat is viscerally honest. Your life is on the line here. And that in most people, there might be some exceptions, but it is notoriously a thing that is really hard to train out of people because on a primal level, we want to live, we want to survive, we do not want to get physically hurt. That is just a thing that is in us as human beings. We don't want our physical safety to be harmed. Um, so when that harm is on the line, what does that actually reveal about your character? Especially in the games like The Between, your characters are often like very mysterious and coy, and they're always cloaking their truths in shadows, and they're trying sort of, to talk about a thing by saying something else. But there's no time for any of that when somebody's lunging at you with a knife. You don't have time to be clever. You don't have time to think about how you're going to say or like give a little half truth, a little omission. Somebody's coming at you with a knife. You're going to have to block it. You're going to have to get out of the way. You're going to have to be the more violent thing right here. And that, what that choice is, can tell us a lot about your character. And what does that reveal? Like, are they guile fighters, direct fighters? Are they brave, cowardly? Are they very creative or very straightforward? Let's say they are in a fight. Let's say, for example, the mother. I think it's very tempting to, when you play the mother, to be like, oh, yeah, they have great anatomical knowledge, right? So they'll probably try to use that in a fight. But would they? They're probably not used to being in a fight. They might panic because they're very intellectual, they're very smart, but they're not very physically gifted necessarily. So that panic can give us a very new angle into the character that dialogue would never have gotten us. Because in dialogue, they're probably always the smartest person in the room. And they probably know, or at the very least, think that. So they're always going to have power in a situation where they can just talk their way out of it. But they don't have that power in a situation where somebody's trying to shoot them, because that's what they're not used to. On the other hand, maybe a legacy or an American who's sort of been belittled for not knowing the etiquette and all of that, they might in this situation have more power. How do they wield that power? What do they wish to do with that? Do they wish to be extremely violent? Do they wish to just inflict the most possible harm? Or are they actually kind of empathetic and creative? And are they trying to minimize harm and how long the fight lasts? All of these are very interesting choices, and we don't really get that out of dialogue because dialogue allows us a lot of leeway for being so dramatic and clever, whereas combat is just you have to decide and you have to decide right now. Other than that, as I mentioned, combat is also very vulnerable. When characters are especially guarded about their emotional pains or their emotional harm, physical harm can be a very great metaphor. Most characters in the between, and probably to a lesser extent something like public access or even Brindlewood Bay, there might be things that they find really hard to talk about. Or like maybe you have a character that really struggles with letting somebody else take care of them on an emotional level. You know, confiding in someone is hard for them. Telling, like speaking of that hurt is really hard for them. But if you're physically hurt, if your arm is bleeding, that sort of gives you a plausible deniability to let someone take care of you, but still hold that power. So do they try to do that, or is that a way, an opening into something more? Physical harm can also be a great metaphor in terms of scars. I really like having my characters like sort of get scars throughout a series, throughout a campaign. I think it helps make combat feel real and grounded. It's not just, oh, we had our cool shootout and, you know, I jumped out of the window, combat rolled and run off into the shadow. No, I actually, for the rest of my life, am going to carry this scar. And then you get to project emotions onto that scar. Maybe that fight was the first time in a long time where the American actually protected someone and they were successful on that. So maybe that scar is, you know, like a trophy. They look at that scar and they think at least one time I used this physical prowess to like protect someone and not hurt someone. Or very likely it's the other way around. Every time they look at that scar, they think of the person that they killed. They think of someone that they let down. They think of maybe something, a lost innocence. It's a silly childhood memory. It's that time they tried to, you know, they tried to tame a horse because they were dared into it and they fell off. And it wasn't that bad, but every time they look at that scar, they think of that moment and how it changed their life. So physical harm can really be tied to a lot of emotional harm, and you can sort of make that into a symbolism. Of course, you want to be careful here that you don't accidentally go into ableism, but a lot of like just scars and things, if you play them, I think with an honest, good mind, then you'll probably be okay. And of course, always checking in with your table. If people start feeling uncomfortable, you can switch. Um, there's also a very different harm in a combat than an emotional moment. I think a lot of people feel like they're better at handling emotional hurt, which I don't necessarily think is true, but especially characters in the between are going to always feel like they have to sort of hide that or be like powerful about it or like do something with it. But again, like a physical harm, most people will be okay with like, sure, you can bandage up my arm, right? And that can sort of be your opening. It also, again, just gives you a different look into the character. Maybe, again, the mother is like just stoic, cold face, doesn't lose composure. And when they actually get hurt, they freak out because that's the hand that they perform surgery with. And what are they if they lose that hand? What are they if, they lose that ability? And maybe it's like not even that bad and they should be able to tell that as a doctor. But it's the panic of physical harm that takes over. And also something that I think is very interesting, especially for the between. Do take note that very small injuries could be lethal. Like, this is the time where, an infected cut on your wrist could cost you your whole arm. It's not like us, like, oh, I have an ouchie and I go to the hospital and I'll be fine. No, these people they don't have medical care that's up to our standards. So I think when you play that, that is definitely something you can keep in mind that even small injuries can be pretty bad, even though they don't need to be grotesque or awful. But there's sort of this lingering fear of infection. There's a threat that as a keeper you can sort of dangle over if they maybe got a condition. You could worsen that condition into an infection, or you could worsen a wound is also something you could do. And then something else that I think is very interesting. I'm not going to go into it too much because it's honestly, it's like it could be a whole presentation by itself. But combat and especially like violence it has a different place in our society than, words do, or like being cruel to someone with just words. There's a very different way that we handle physical violence. First of all, is we tend to, like society as a whole, tends to believe that some people have, they can commit justified violence, right? Some people have sort of the right to violence. Often that will be a police force or an army. If they commit violence, that is typically seen as more or less legitimate, but people aren't necessarily going to question the violence. Whereas if some random civilian does it, that is often a crime. If a police officer drags me into a car, that's one thing. But if I just randomly do that to someone, that's just standard, even worse. Which would be true, for the between public access and Brindlewood. I think here the more modern ones are very interesting. In public access, if your latchkey suddenly attacks somebody with a knife, that is not, in society's eyes, justified violence, even if it might be in the context of the game. And they will probably have been raised with the idea that violence is bad, that it is a fail state of humanity, and that if you have sort of gotten to the point where you're using violence against someone else, that something has gone really, really terribly wrong. I think especially for like people like me, if you're if you're female, it's not. It's really violence is sort of not an option, right? It's like if I were to commit violence against someone, I would probably feel worse for myself, even if it was like in defense. But I think a lot of society is like, that's always like the worst option. You should always pick another one. So I think that could be very interesting in a game like Public Access is when does your character believe violence is okay? And how do they deal with that sort of, that failure of society with these things that they were raised with and now they failed? Um, you can go about it in many different ways. There will also definitely be characters that are not necessarily raised with that view, but I think that should be something that you're aware of that is out of the ordinary. In modern settings, we usually tend to raise our children that violence is bad. Even if you're like the type that's go like, if somebody bullies you, you should do something back. We typically still feel like there's a level that is acceptable, and if you go over that level of violence, then you're again the bad guy, even though you had a justified reason to do that. Brindlewood Bay, same. Nobody expects an old lady to commit violence. And when they do, society is going to treat that as something odd and scary and bad. They're probably not going to like it because it's going to sort of unpaint, an airbrushed reality where old ladies don't need to commit violence because they're safe and they're happy and we're taking care of them and we're doing good. And now they're sort of there really clearly breaking that reality, breaking that lie. So these are all things. And also, like the Maven herself will probably feel like that's really scary. That's not what I'm supposed to do. That's not how the world is supposed to be. Um, and I think with the Between, there's a really interesting element of class. I think if you play something like the Explorer, who has like an actual mask about this very thing, where if the Explorer commits violence against a class that is perceived as lower as themselves, that'll probably be okay. Most of society will probably kind of be like, you know, that is how it is. Maybe they don't like it, but they feel like it's an accepted part of reality. Whereas if an explorer commits violence to someone of his own level of class, like his own echelon, that's probably a really big deal. Because now we're touching the rich, and that's not done. They don't like it, not even when it's one of their own, right? So I think there's a lot that you can play with sort of the how society and all of that comes into play. And I think if these are things that you're not very interested in, you can sort of gloss over it. I think Ashley Oakes in Public Access wasn't very concerned with how all of that treated her. She absolutely had like some self-loathing and the idea that she was a bad person for committing this violence, but it wasn't a super big arc, but it absolutely can be if you want to have that as a focal point. I just think that it's important when violence has happened or is about to happen, ask yourself with all of these aspects around violence, how would my character really feel about that? So that is why you might choose to pick combat. Basically, it gives us a really honest look. It gives us new vulnerabilities that are really interesting to explore. And it just gives you a lot as a keeper and as a character to work with in the broader world, in the broader setting. So, what makes a good fight scene? This might be a bit of a hot take. I don't know. I would say that in a narrative game, combat is not a different beast. And I feel like very often we treat it as such because a lot of games will have different mechanics for it. Which kind of in our brains maybe goes like, oh, so it's different. Like I need to treat it different. And in some ways you do. TTRPGs, it needs to be said, are tragically just bad at action scenes. It's just hard to convey action with your words. In movies, it's really easy. It's a very visual thing. We get to see it. We get to see the actor do all the cool moves, and we don't need to know the name of the moves. We don't need to know like exactly what is happening. We just see a lot of cool action. When John Wick is on the screen, I'm not going like, oh, that's a roundhouse kick. Oh, that's like this move. That's he's using this martial arts. I'm just like, hell yeah, punch that guy. Like it's just cool. But I think that's why for a narrative game, you want to use combat to make it about learning about the character. Don't make it about don't make it about the action too much. Of course, the action there is important, but it's really about the character, how they are positioned in the world, how they are positioned, how they look at themselves, how they treat others. All of that can tell us more about how they are going to behave in combat and what combat does to them. To do that, I think you want to, oh, sorry. I think to do that, you want to set some clear and interesting stakes. So I think violence itself or combat itself should never be what the scene is about. So I don't, or at least I feel like a lot of fight scenes fall flat when kind of what we do is, I want a fight scene, right? I want to fight. What we want to do is we want to make this scene about something, which I think all scenes should be about some focal question or something to hold on to. You want stakes other than just harm. It could be about protecting something. It could be about stealing something, but getting caught or having to commit violence to get that. Maybe you're trying to gain access to something, or maybe you're trying to impress someone. But there should always be another goal. For example, the American might be trying to buy the vessel time to complete their ritual. And that is why they're committing this violence, because they need to gain more time. They're protecting the vessel. Or maybe the mother was trying to gain access to a body part for the child, but there's an acquaintance of whoever just died in there and they're trying to stop that. Are you willing to commit violence to get that anyway? Or you're trying to get into Dr. Clauser's office, but Erica is trying to stop you, right? So there's always a different goal. This next one, if you can do it, it's fantastic. It is a little hard, but I think if you can, you want to try and use your environment. If you can, try to maybe start off with a paint a scene, or what I try to do as a keeper, if I know violence is coming up, I'll give them like a quick layout of the room. I think as a keeper, you want to be really generous here. If a player is like, oh, can I like have a wardrobe that I'm like smashing on them? Say yes, absolutely, there's a wardrobe. Can I shoot a candle to put the room on fire? Absolutely, there's a candle there right now. We want to be creative with the environment because that again tells us something. Not only has your character noticed these things in the room, but they're noticing and sort of making in their brain them an application of violence. They see a candle and they're like, okay, I can light a room on fire. They see a table and they're like, I can smash somebody's face in this. They see a window and they're like, okay, I can throw you out of it, which is not typically how we feel about these elements in a room. So if they're using that or if they're absolutely not, maybe the legacy has their weapon and that's all they're using. They're ignoring everything in the room because they're so trained that they should be able to do this with this weapon. Or the mother is like trying to put object or the undeniable is trying to like run away and put objects between themselves and whoever is chasing them, something like that. What are the risks the environment presents and what are the opportunities is sort of how you want to think of that. You want to use active voice. Don't be like, and then they got shot. No, I shoot them. You want to be active. You want to, there's no shame in using movie references. I feel that, again, because movies are so visual, that often helps. Of course, you run the risk of somebody being like, I never watched that movie. I don't know what you're talking about. But that's okay. That happens. Um, Tell us what your character does, but also why and how they feel about it. And that doesn't need, you don't need to get too much into that because we do want to keep the action at the forefront. But are they creative and are they spotting these opportunities? Did they shoot that candle on purpose or by accident? And now they're kind of panicky and they're just running with it. When the knife goes into the chest of the person, how do they feel? Are they triumphant? Are they scared? Are they glad it's over? Are they just fully absorbed with their own feelings? How do they feel about it? What are they doing? And then you want to match the tone of your character and the game. combat in the between is probably going to be brutal or stylized for kind of going for that prestige feel. In public access, I like having it be like really surreal and over the top, or have it be kind of absurd in how mundane violence can be. I don't know if anybody here has seen the series Barry by Bill Hader. There are some absolutely fantastic fight scenes in there because they're so stupid. And not in like a slapsticky way, but in it's just it really hammers home how silly violence is actually. There's this one scene where long story short, he's an assassin, but he wants to be an actor. Bill Hader plays an assassin who wants to be an actor. He is sent to kill a guy. He goes into the room and he sees like all of these trophies for like um, taekwondo or karate or some form of martial arts. And he sees that. And then the guy like walks out and they start duking it out. They start fighting. And at one point, the camera just it's like a one shot and it's just focused on a wall as they like stumble out of frame and you just kind of hear the grunting and the fighting noises and things are falling over, but the camera stays focused on this same wall. And you just kind of sit there in like that awkward moment of, wow, this is kind of dumb. Like these two guys are trying to kill each other, and that's horrifying, but also kind of dumb. And I think that's a really fun tone to kind of hit with public access. And with the Murder Mavens, you can get pretty campy and silly with it. You can also, of course, subvert the tone of what you're going with, but combat has a lot, or violence, I guess I should say, has a lot of tones that you can sort of play with. So try mixing that up and feel like which one makes sense for your character. Um, so yeah, try not to treat combat as something different. It's just another way of learning about your character and learning about the game and driving stakes. You want to have stakes that are not just, I can get hurt. You want to use your environment. I think that really elevates a scene. And it's all right if don't know the perfect words, but just the fact that you're like bringing these elements in makes us feel more grounded. Use active voice, tell us how your character feel, and try to match the tone of the game and your character. Other than that, you want to keep fight scenes fairly brief. Um, I am personally an opponent. Like I personally prefer to keep most scenes like brief. I think it's better to cut off when you feel there's more to be said than sort of meander. But in dialogue, it doesn't really matter that much if you do kind of meander because sometimes that does give you like something to hold on to, and that's like where the conversation kind of picks up. In combat, you want to try and be brief about it. You want to try and use that active voice, just get us a lot of information, and then we cut away or we keep moving. Typically, because the stakes, while high, are often kind of simple. It's, about going somewhere, getting something, protecting something. You can break up a fight. A fight can be divided into phrases or parts. But you basically want to then change the stakes. Maybe the first part of the fight is about protecting something. And then the second part is, oh no, there's like a lot more that was actually going on. And now I have to not only protect them, but I have to make sure that they don't get kidnapped or, they got dragged away and now I need to get them back. Now it's about getting something back. Um, but if it's just the same thing, if it's about getting into a room, you probably don't need to spend too much time on it. But you want to spend some time on the aftermath. And there should be a back and forth. A fight should ebb and flow. I think this is probably where you can ask your keeper if it's, depending on how you roll, of course, if it's okay if you sort of control the NPC for a little bit or the side character for a little bit. Things like, I thrust my sword at them and they disarm me, but I go like flying over the desk, but I grab a lamp and I smash it on their head. He stumbles back into like you should be able to say a little bit like that. I think most keepers will be like, sure, just keep it within whatever you rolled, or if we're gonna get to the roll, don't Don't say how to fight ends. And dare to lose. I think there's when it's your character, I think there's a temptation to just make them really super badass, and I think they absolutely can be. But I think we tend to like fight scenes where it looks like the character is going to lose, but then they get back on their feet, or they at least like suffer some hardship, because that's how we know, like, oh, this is a serious thing, and the character suffered, but they won in the end. So getting some punches, even if you roll like a perfect 12, I think the temptation then to be there is like, oh, I shoot him between the eyes, bam, we're done. Um, but maybe before that you struggled for the gun. Maybe, your ears are ringing, but you still did it and you just snap back and continue on. Also, maybe losing while it's you lost a fight, maybe that is actually a preferred outcome. Sometimes, depending on what you're doing, it could be. So dare to lose, it can be a very interesting result. So now we sort of know why we might want to pick a fight scene and not dialogue, and we have some tips for how are we going to make this interesting? How are we going to keep this flowing? How do the mechanics actually back you up here? So how to use Carved from Brindlewood mechanics for your combat. I'm going to go over all of them, and we are starting with the day move, kind of, I think, self-explanatory. What are you afraid will happen? This is your chance to set your stakes clearly and use your environment. So before you roll, before everything happens, just make sense of the space, get your goal. Like, yes, I know I can get hurt, but what I'm really afraid of is that I'm not even going to get into this office. That's kind of, or I'm really afraid that this monster is going to overrun me and they're going to take the vessel and I didn't protect them. I failed once again into protecting somebody that I loved. That's what I'm really afraid of. You can use the day move, of course, when the move happens during the day. Otherwise, I think when it's like a low stakes combat, a friendly match, rivals testing each other, something like that, where death isn't necessarily on the line. I think that's also something to remember is that combat doesn't always have to end in death. That does not need to be. In most cases, I think a lot of people, there will be exceptions. Some, monsters or people will just want to kill you, but a lot of people have their own goals. And if they achieve those goals, they'll leave you be. If, the goal is to keep you out of a room and Erica just like throws your ass out on the curb, like she probably doesn't care to walk over and snap your neck. Like, why would she? That is for most people a level further than just, yeah, I don't want you to be here and I am willing to break your jaw over it. So it can just be like physical harm, it doesn't have to be death. You can also use a day move for combat that isn't really about winning. Flirty fights are a perfect example. We love a flirty fight, but winning in this sense, like, what is winning? Do we just want to like not embarrass ourselves? Um, Physical harm, like grievous physical harm, is probably not really on the line. We don't actually want to hurt this person. We want to show them how clever and witty and skilled we are, right? We're having fun. We are not aiming to really put this person in a hospital. That's sort of the opposite of what we're aiming for. We want this person to like us, not dislike us. A distraction, maybe, you're firing at Pettigrew so that he doesn't see somebody else slip away, or you're trying to just get more ground between you and the cops to run. It doesn't always have to be about death. It can be about, impressing someone, distracting someone. You can also use this if you sort of want to set up a move for someone else. As I mentioned, the buying time, being a distraction, these are all sort of, you're gonna let these results inform how somebody else rolls probably and sort of what position that they're rolling in. The night move, also sort of a self-explanatory. So you can use your is force in that to complicate the stakes. Physical harm again is fine, but try to tie it to the stakes at hand. If we are worried about not getting access to a certain place, then maybe not getting access to that place is a lot worse than we thought it would be. maybe there's something in there that we really wanted, or maybe this physical harm ends not with our death, but with us being experimented upon for the rest of our lives, something like that. Or humiliation is a very powerful tool. A lot of characters in the between are probably going to be more worried about just looking really stupid than dying. I think especially for an undeniable, that's a great option because they can withstand so much physical harm, but losing like societal grace, losing that power is really hard on them. The same for like a vessel. They'll probably be extremely powerful in a supernatural way. So just make them feel that they're not in a physical way. This is where they lose their power. Make them feel that. That's typically what a between character really, really hates, which is, of course, what makes it very interesting to do. The night move is very interesting for high stakes combat, fights against the supernatural, and strong clashes of ideology. This is a really important one. I think a lot of combat is sort of about the ideas that we stand for. If you think about, especially, like fights in Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or whatever, like they're cool fights, but what they are really about is what these people represent, what they believe in, what they're fighting for. And having a character that, believes in something square off with someone who has the opposite belief or a belief that doesn't fully work with that can be really interesting because then a win isn't just about who was more skilled, but it's kind of about what idea prevails, who is right in a sense. Might makes right. I don't agree with it, but it's definitely a very interesting way of treating it and having that be like a narrative thing where you are wondering, or like where you are having this battle represent the ideas and what these characters stand for as they battle against each other. You also want to look at fictional positioning, of course. Um, if the legacy is squaring off against Erica, they've been fighting, supernatural monsters their whole life. And they might be okay taking a former boxer, the mother, or the unquiet who just like got their body back after like centuries of being a ghost and is just out for a night on a town. They're probably gonna struggle a lot harder. So you kind of want to see how dangerous is this fight and how much can we complicate the stakes. So this is one question that came up a lot is how many rolls for a combat? Bummer answer. It depends. I cannot fix this question for you. I'm terribly sorry. But I think these are some tips that you want to do. If you feel like one roll doesn't feel like it's quite gotten us where we are, or doesn't feel like it quite resolved the combat, that's probably because the stakes have changed or they have not been properly met. So you can break the combat up again. Maybe it's first about gaining access to a room. Okay, I slid past you. Now I want to grab something. You're still trying to stop me. That's a different fight. We're fighting for different things. So you can change the environment. We're in different rooms, we're in different spaces, and we can change the stakes. Maybe it started as a very low stakes. I just want to grab this thing. And then it turns out, I don't know, that it summons a monster, or I have unleashed an experiment that wants to kill me. And now the stakes have significantly changed. That probably warrants a new role because that's not what we set up initially. So that is still combat. Those are two combat roles, but they have different stakes, they have different outcomes, they have different interesting things about them. So, as always, the most important rule is just do not roll again unless the fiction has significantly changed. Sometimes that's going to mean one roll is enough. We've done what we need. We're getting out of there. Sometimes that can mean two, three. Probably don't want to go more than three. I don't know what you're doing at that point, but it can happen. Just feel it out. Like, do we feel like violence is still necessary to get to our goal, and has that goal changed? The investigation move. So now we're getting spicy. We have gone past what we feel is, yeah, those are the moves that I'm gonna use. But body language and fighting style, sort of harking back to my first point, can reveal a lot of interesting information about a person. And that is true for your hunters or for your PCs, but it's also true for the side characters. How somebody responds to violence, what they, in that moment of physical harm, are trying to protect, are trying to conceal, are trying to show, all of these things can tell us something. Things you can use is maybe people drop something. They're scurrying away, or you get their jacket and you tear up, a pocket and they drop something. When losing, people could offer what they know. The don't kill me. I have a family, and also I saw who murdered this guy. I'll tell you everything I know. Just don't hurt me. That could be a way to get information. And also a friendly reminder that presence specifically states when you intimidate someone. So combat doesn't necessarily have to be rolled with vitality. If you're mostly just blustering and you want to just really kind of get that person to tell you what they know, using violence, using maybe short combat. But intimidating someone is definitely something you can use here as an investigation role that can go into violence or short combat. And now we're getting really spicy. Now we're getting spicy, spicy. Vulnerable move. Um, if you have a vice that deals with violence, for my legacy, I made one that was dueling. So basically, they had to always get into a fight and get really worked up before they felt like they could even talk about their emotions because they were so repressed and they had been taught to like not show anything except anger, that unless violence was somehow involved, unless they had that power, they could not talk about anything. And that can be a really interesting way to show your character and just how deeply ingrained maybe this self-loathing or this fear of intimacy really is. As I mentioned, combat is by its nature very intimate. Um, Barring, shootouts or if we're all fighting with pole arms, we're probably going to be in pretty close proximity. There's going to be, sweating, panting. There's a lot going on. Um, and yeah, it gives us a great plausible deniability for physical contact, right? Maybe I really want to touch you, but the only way I feel I can do that is by making it about a fight. Make it about winning. Make it about something that is absolutely not how attracted I am to you. We're doing everything. We're doing everything to not admit that maybe we've grown close to someone. So that's a really fun way to sort of go with it. And again, the stakes can be fairly low. It can escalate to like, I'm actually so angry, I do want to hurt you. Or it can just be like like I'm kind of almost like just venting this anger in a physical way. Like, I'm screaming in my pillow, except I'm using a sword to lunge at you or wrestling in the garden. But to have sort of that excuse for physical contact and have those emotions sort of wrapped up in something else that makes them feel powerful or that can be used as a metaphor. I usually, especially for a vulnerable move, I just let players decide amongst themselves if there even needs to be a winner and then who that is. Um, there's going to be playbooks that kind of make sense. Like, yeah, if you want to win this fight, you can. I think for a vulnerable move, it also just very often just kind of ends at a stalemate or something, comes up and they leave the fight because they're done. Or maybe the emotion that is getting finally like poured out, that is finally being portrayed, sort of puts an end to the fight. Because now we're like, okay, you actually said something that we need to deal with right now, and we are going to talk about it, and that can also like end the fight. Um, But it's really, really fun. I did it for a whole campaign of the Legacy, just fighting people and screaming at them. I can really recommend it. It's a really fun way to sort of spice up your vulnerable moves and do something really fun with them. And that's it for me. That is my presentation. I would love to hear if there are any thoughts or questions.
I definitely want to bring up like a point of like I typically make the distinction between violence and combat because a single bullet is not a combat scene.
Hmm.
However, uh, just to go back to trophy, a particular module has this special combat role modifier. Instead of it has like this ballroom dance and uses the combat role. And I think that's very key to understanding what combat is because it is forces that are opposed in a procedure that takes multiple stages to be resolved. It can be resolved with a single roll. However, the single role will have multiple narrative parts interacting with one another, a sort of give and take scenario, which is like, which is why I think like the contest role is just is a variant combat role in trophy, as well as like going like the vulnerable move combat role, combat mechanic. It depends on like the nature of the violence of what is being given and taking of like forces because like you can have physical violence without it being combat. It's whether or not the violence is desired by the parties for the sake of violence. I think of like a sort of BDSM or sadism sort of vice could be like a very interesting exploration of violence without it being combat. At the same time, it can like sort of divulge into combat depending on the personal feelings of the parties involved. It's just a very interesting exploration of like who wants what, which I very appreciate highlighting a lot about within your presentation, Jazy.
Yeah, it definitely, I think that's a very interesting point. Yeah, as I said, like violence, society has like a lot of thoughts about that, and combat as well, like combat even more so. I don't think that
Mm-hmm.
anybody in a modern society, like violence is one thing, but I don't think anyone in a modern society is like expected to get into combat,
Mm-hmm.
unless, like as a civilian.
Like,
So I think that's definitely like a very interesting distinction to keep in mind.
yeah, because like again with the explorer like they can like use violence very casually of like degrading those around them showing off their power through money. Money can be a form of violence, of just like, oh yeah, your home, I buy it now. And there really is no combat per se
Mhm.
in that. If Theodore was involved with the Explorer, then like you could say that could be combat of purchasing power. Um, but yeah, I definitely like I find like people are very concerned with like of not portraying it right of like, oh, it's taking too long. We're focusing too long on the individual feelings on that. But what do you think is like the right amount of feeling of like it's exploring the scene long enough without it just slowing down to like a little bit of a slog,
Mhm.
because like you
Yeah.
don't want every hits to count, but however at the same time you do want the hits to matter.
Hmm. Yeah, I think for combat, you can do something like just describe a combat as, there's a short and brutal exchange of blows, something like that,
Mhm.
right? We're not going blow by blow, but using brutal, using brief, sort of going into the aftermath of it immediately gives us an idea. And I think other than that, it's kind of the same feeling that you need to have for other scenes where I think there's in dialogue, I also notice it a lot where people feel like they need to do everything. Um, and I do it too because you like a scene and you want to kind of keep it going and you sort of, especially in dialogue, I see a lot of people sort of like breathe in like second lives into a conversation or like third lives and we sort of like try to keep it going. I think when you sort of start to feel that lull in a combat, I think that's where you can say like, okay, I think we can cut the spotlight or as a keeper, be like fairly brief with it. Um, yeah, I think it's sort of like it's kind of a feeling that you need to have, which is also like how many roles is a complicated question because it really depends. Just try to frame a scene or like how what helps me is framing the scene with like a question in mind, right? Like we want to get this thing. I feel like combat is my only option to get it. Okay, how am I gonna get it? Or like how am I gonna feel about that? What am I gonna do with that? And then just when you feel like you've answered that question, that's it, right? That's what we need from the scene. That we don't need a whole lot more. We don't. I mean, sometimes it's really fun to just describe gore and graphic injuries, and if everybody's cool with that. But I think you just want to make sure that you're not sort of yeah, just like looping and meandering through the violence if the goal has been reached. Are there any other questions or comments that people want to share?
I think everyone's questions were answered. This was a really great presentation, Jazzy. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I was kind of struggling to think like, oh, I should ask something, but like, no, that presentation was so like comprehensive. Like, yeah, I think I would want to got covered pretty handily.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Absolutely. This was I've always been really kind of afraid of narrating combat, just because I don't know, like, oh, I'm not going to do it good, or it's not going to be exciting, it's going to be boring, or but this is really reframed it in a lot of ways that I can absolutely easily work with. So thank you so much for that. It's really
absolutely.
I'm really excited to become the violence murder bot, murder hobo that I've never been before.
My mission complete. Yeah, I think like as you say, like as I said in the beginning, I think a lot of people feel like I need to be like the best action narrator ever. But having read a lot of books and having like listened to audio books a lot, it's just it's a difficult medium to do it in. It's the same thing where in movies a lot of people will say like, oh, it's shallower than a book, right? Because yeah, in a visual medium, we're not privy to like the inner thoughts, or we get them like through very different means. We get them through, you know, nonverbal acting or dialogue, which can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Whereas in a book, they can just tell you how they feel. And then we know. And I feel like that's sort of the same with TTRPG. Yeah, if you're looking to create the same like adrenaline hype that you feel watching a John Wick movie, you're probably not going to get it because that's not what the medium is designed to do. Maybe if someone's extremely talented, they can do it, but I think it's more important because we do have, I think the strength of a TTRPG medium is that we do have so much time to say, like, this is a character. We get to explore it. We get to explore them. We get to sit with their feelings and their actions and the aftermath of it all. And also, very importantly, then we build a story on that. And I think that's also where people kind of leave combat off, or when it's done, it's done. But try to make it important and just call back to it, a lost fight, a won fight, but call back to it, make it an emotional beat. And I think as long as you do that, especially in Guard from Middlewood, you're gonna be golden.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jazzy. Really, really appreciate you coming in and doing this talk. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and everybody who is watching this on YouTube later. We'll have more Twig Talks coming up in the next few weeks, so keep joining in.